emergency room in Alabama, in Eufaula, and I said, I've got to have something for pain. And she explained to me that their ratings were such that they didn't carry pain meds, but she said, I'm going to pray for you. And I still remember the prayer, guys. She said, God, give this man the peace of mind that he needs right now, and the doctors the knowledge to do what they can to help him. Well, the pain was still there, but that peace came about me again. Well, I make my way now to the emergency room, and they go in to the first little exam room, and they go to cutting off my favorite LL Bean insulated, thin-insulated camo breeches, and I'm now laying in front of people I don't know in the bare naked truth, and there's an attendant standing at my feet, and he goes to untie my shoes, and I said, just cut them off, I'm never going to need them again. And he looked at me like I'm looking at you, son, and he said, don't talk like that in here. Don't sometimes when we're in a fix or a jam, we go to God in prayer and ask for His help, and then we forget? Just an hour or so before, God said, you're going to be okay. But I'd gotten caught up too much in the crisis that I had forgotten that He had already answered my prayer. Well, He untied my shoes. I never got my breeches back, but I still wear those hunting boots. They took some x-rays and they said, Mr. Higginbotham, we have some bad news for you. You've broken 5 vertebrae and you're paralyzed from the waist down. I said, well, I didn't need a trip here to figure that out. What are we going to do for the pain? Well, that's when I learned that morphine makes me itchy and conjure up people that have been long gone, meaning I hallucinated. Everybody clears a room except for one attendant. And he's standing there with this device, and he said, I'm going to have to insert a Foley catheter before you go to Dothan for emergency operation. I looked at him, and I said, I've got one in each arm. He said, no, sir, those are IVs. Well, I learned that morning what a Foley catheter was, and I tell you, I did not like it. I make my way now by ambulance, and word is coming back that Al Higginbotham, one of the safest hunters known around, people didn't like hunting with me because I was so safety conscious, was near death. They thought maybe I'd fallen out of a tree, that there was a gunshot, or there was horseplay. Guys, it just happened. No fault of my own. It was God's plan. It was the best day of my life. Are you listening? Well, people have gathered now, and they set me for surgery the next day at noon, which is going to run about 6 hours, where they're going to take bone from my hip to use as fusion material, and then stabilize the broken bones with Harrington rods that are about 12 inches long and the diameter of a pencil. While I'm in the operating room, my wife Devin, sitting in one of these little rooms with family members, she said, she just popped up, she said, it's out of the blue. Not really. But she says, Al's going to live through this and he's going to walk again. She was mocked and scorned by members of our family. Have you ever stood up for your faith and said, God is real? And things happen for a good reason, and people put you down? Well, in the middle of a crisis, the leader of the family, the guy that was the provider, was in trouble, and my wife said, God has spoken to me, and people mocked her. It's the challenge that we all face every day in our lives. Well, I come through surgery, and I'm sent to what I learned to call expensive care, but in doctors' terms they call it intensive care, where I make it through from intensive care to a regular room after about a week and a half. And one night, I was laying in bed. I don't know if the TV was on, but there was... I just laid there. Like the guy who's paralyzed from the waist down can get up and open the door. I said, come in. And this little lady walks in and she said, do you remember me? And I said, yeah, you're Alice. She said, I had to come back and see you because I heard you lived. And I wanted to know why you weren't in shock. And I've never been to a case where someone was so seriously injured that they had control of their mind, that they seemed very optimistic. And I said, well, God, Alice, what you don't know is that God paid a house call about 30 minutes before you arrived. God was sending me a message, fellas. I'd already asked for help and forgotten about it when I said, cut my boots off, I'll never need it. Well, God sent Alice to remind me, hey, bud, I was there with you. I answered your prayer. You're going to be all right. Well, I now make it up to, by air ambulance, up to Atlanta, Georgia, to the Shepherd Spinal Center, where my first day of admissions, I go through a series of interviews, and the doctors in there, I was pretty low at that point. And I go into my room that night, and I have 3 roommates. None of them made it home. They all died. No matter how bad things are for you in life, you'll always find somebody who's a little worse, or maybe even a lot worse off than you. But I know that God sent me to that room to remind me that even though you're in a tough fix here, there are people who are having a harder time. I went through the interview, and the doctor there who was assessing me, he told me about what my life was going to be like. He said, you won't live past 50. I'm way beyond that, guys. He said, your divorce rate for someone with injuries like you is 90%. Been married now 34 years. Just added a year to it, Pastor. And he's given me a very dismal future. And I said, well, why don't you just give me a razor blade and I'll cut my wrist? Well, I learned there's something you don't tell a shrink in a spinal center, because I was kidding, and they put me on a suicide watch the entire time I was there. Well, I'm there long-term. Devin finds an apartment at the Atlanta area, sets up house so she can be close to me. And the only place we could find to talk privately was, of all places, a little chapel. And one night we were in the little chapel and we were talking, and she said, I got to tell you that when you were in surgery there in Dothan, God told me you were going to live through this, that you were going to be just fine. And it was that night that we made the plan that once I got out and got back on my feet, literally, that I would make the climb on Grinnell Glacier in Glacier National Park. Now, I wasn't about to tell anybody at the Shepherd Spinal Center this, because I was already on a suicide watch, and the guy in a wheelchair doesn't talk about walking, much less climbing mountains. I'm now sent home, and I'm in rough shape. I've lost over 50 pounds. I can't roll over. I can't sit up. I had to go through potty training all over again. I'm a grown man. Pretty humbling. It was then that I realized that we were going to lose everything financially. And that's when I realized what was important: my faith, my family, and the supports of friend and community. A couple weeks after being home, I realized that there's something very, very wrong with my back, and it turns out my fusion had failed, that my body was rejecting my body. The material they used from my bone as fusion material around these Harrington rods was abscessing. So we had to go to work and find another doctor who could work on me. A Sigma Chi fraternity brother from the University of Florida calls me out of the blue. Not really, because there's a master plan. He calls me and says, Al, we hear that you've had an injury. We've got a surgery we've never tried on anyone before. And if you're as dumb as today as you were when you were in college, we know that you're the fellow that we can try this operation on. Well, I had now to call my insurance adjuster and tell them that I've talked to a fraternity brother who I hadn't visited or seen in over 20 years. They have an experimental operation, and will you guys at the insurance company pay for it? She said, I'll get back with you. Well, you probably heard your family talk and fuss about insurance and how they're so eager to pay for everything. Well, 2 to 3 days later, they called me back, and she said, yes. They should have denied the claim. Someone else was in control here, folks. Someone else was running the show. I was just along for the ride. They tell me because the operation, which will last 12 hours, is so dangerous, to make my plans, which I did. I was already prepared for my maker, but I made my plans, went and had the operation, and after 12 hours I find myself in the recovery room, and Dr. Kozak was at my feet, and he said, can you move your toes or your feet? And I looked to either side, and I gave him a command, and my feet wiggled. The hooping and the hollering was incredible. Dr. Kozak also said, Al, when did you break your back before this one? I said, I never did. He says, well, we have found that you have fractured T6, T7 a long time ago, and that you have also broken T12, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's more bones than football players hobble around with, and they were all in my back. And I realized then that God was sending me a message. Remember, Higginbotham, when you prayed for me and you had the pain and paralysis in your upper body, I touched you. And I took those broken bones and healed them on the spot. know the signal. I find myself now July 2nd, Medicine Lake and Glacier National Park. There's a storm, a winter snowstorm moving through the pass, and didn't think much of it. The next morning we set out for Grinnell Glacier and make our way. It takes about 4 hours. Able-bodied person could do it probably in an hour, but it took me 4, maybe 5 hours to get to the base where we were going to make the final ascent. And there were some long faces with the people that I was with, and they said, Al, because of the snowstorm, we're not going to be able to summit Grinnell Glacier. And I was kind of down and out, and then I looked around and I didn't see any other people who were paraplegics. I'm a paraplegic. I wear braces on both legs. I have to have crutches. I still use a wheelchair. But I realized that after all this planning that I was not